I still remember the way the light looked that night, smeared and broken in the rain on the windshield, like the city was melting. If I close my eyes I can still see it, all those reds and golds and sickly greens bleeding together, the wipers carving temporary clarity that disappeared again in seconds. That is how that whole year feels in my memory now, to be honest. Brief flashes of sharpness and then everything blurring again before I can fully understand what I am seeing. If I am going to confess this properly to you, I should start a little before the affair itself, because otherwise none of it will make sense and it will just sound like I woke up one morning and decided to destroy my own life for fun. You remember how excited I was when I first got the job at the architecture firm. I thought it would be my grown-up chapter, my real life beginning. High ceilings, big windows, shelves lined with models and sketchbooks. A place where people drank too much coffee and talked about lines and light like they were talking about religion. I loved it. At the beginning, at least. I was the youngest woman on the team, and for a while that felt special instead of exhausting. I met my husband there. Or I should say, I met the man who became my husband there. His name is Khan. When he first walked into the office he looked like someone who had stepped out of one of those glossy architecture magazines, all angular features and rolled-up sleeves and opinions about concrete. He was a senior designer, already with a reputation for being brilliant and impossible. He pulled apart my first serious proposal in a meeting, saying it was polite but forgettable. Afterward, when he found me out on the balcony swallowing down humiliation, he told me that forgettable was worse than bad, because at least bad had teeth. I fell in love with him in stages. First with his mind, then with his hands, finally with the way he looked at buildings like they were alive. When he started looking at me with that same intensity, I felt chosen in a way that was dizzying. We moved fast. Dinner turned into late nights in the studio turned into mornings where I was brushing my teeth at his sink, half of my makeup gone, his shirt on my back. A year later we were living together. 2 years after that we were married in a small civil ceremony where my mother cried more than I did. Those first years were loud and bright. We argued about everything, from politics to paint colors, but it felt like passion then, like proof that we were both fully alive. We took night walks in neighborhoods we could not afford, pointing at apartments and saying one day. We believed our own story. Somewhere along the way, the arguments stopped being about ideas and started being about logistics. Whose turn it was to get groceries. Why he forgot the dinner with my sister again. When we would finally start trying for a baby. That last topic was the one that sat between us like an uninvited guest at every meal. I wanted to start. He kept saying later, when the next project was finished, when the firm stabilized, when we moved to a bigger place, when. I did not notice exactly when my world shrank down to the space between my desk and my side of the bed. I woke up one morning, rolled over, and realized we had not touched each other properly in weeks. When I tried to slide closer, he mumbled something about an early meeting and turned away, already halfway back in his head to the building he was obsessed with designing down by the waterfront. The waterfront project was everything to him. A mixed-use complex with a hotel, offices, and a music lounge that the investors wanted to feel like a slice of Havana by the sea. They flew in a consultant from Cuba, a woman named Rosa, to advise on authenticity, and the whole office buzzed with the energy of it. I watched Khan disappear deeper into that world, his calendar full of site visits and late meetings. He came home smelling like plaster dust and other people's cigarettes. I told myself it was just a busy season. That every couple went through phases like this. That once the project opened and the pressure eased, we would go back to being us again, the version of us who danced in the empty living room when we first got the keys, who got drunk on cheap wine and lay on the floor tracing patterns on the ceiling. Then one Tuesday evening I opened his laptop to send myself a file, and something shifted irrevocably. It was not like I went looking for anything. I typed in the password he had given me years ago without thinking, the way you brush your teeth or lock your door. The mail app was already open. A message from someone named Lila was at the top, bold and unread. I almost closed it out of instinct, that old respect for privacy. Almost. But the subject line was a single word. Tonight. My heart did that ridiculous cartoon thing where it suddenly becomes very noticeable in your chest. I clicked. Of course I clicked. I wish I could tell you I did not, but that would be another lie. The email was short. She wrote that she was already at the lounge, that the band was sound checking, that she had picked a table in the corner. She said she had replayed the last time in her head all day and that if he did not show up, she would actually die. There was a winking emoji at the end. I had never in my life wanted to punch a punctuation mark before. Every sound in the apartment grew louder and farther away at the same time. The traffic outside, the neighbor's television, my own breathing. I scrolled down and saw the chain of messages below. Weeks of them. Some practical, about schedules and meetings at the site. Some personal, about songs he had recommended, about how tired he sounded in the office, about how she thought he needed someone to make him stop for a second and just exist. The worst ones were not the explicit ones. There was no pornography, no descriptions of bodies. It was the intimacy of the small details that gutted me. The fact that she knew his coffee order, that she asked about his bad back after long days on site, that he had written once that he felt more himself in that half-dark lounge than he did anywhere else lately. That used to be me, I thought. I used to be his soft place. I do not remember standing up, but suddenly I was in front of the mirror by the door, my reflection pale and sharp. My hand shook as I grabbed my coat. I checked the time. If I left immediately, I could be at the waterfront in 20 minutes. I should have called him. Or her. Or a friend. Or my mother. I did not call anyone. I shoved my feet into the first shoes I found and stepped out into the hallway like I was stepping onto a stage I had not rehearsed for. The taxi ride was a smear of neon and rain. The driver asked where I was going and I told him the name of the hotel, the one attached to the new complex. He whistled and said he had driven half the city there lately, that everyone wanted to see the new place. I said nothing. My mouth felt full of ash. When we pulled up outside the building, it was exactly as beautiful as the renderings I had seen in the office. Clean lines and warm light spilling from tall windows, palm trees and square planters, the soft rumble of bass from somewhere deep inside. The lobby smelled like money and citrus. I followed the signs to the music lounge. The closer I got, the dimmer the lighting became, the more the air thickened with smoke and perfume. At the entrance, a hostess with a tight smile asked if I had a reservation. I told her I was meeting someone. It was the truth, in a twisted way. She waved me inside. The room was all low tables and velvety chairs, with a small stage at the far end. A band was playing something slow and sinuous, the singer's voice slipping through the dark like silk. Warm neon lit the edges of the bar, red and amber, turning the glasses into stained glass. For a moment I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust. Then I saw him. He was at a corner table, just as the email had said. A woman sat opposite him, leaning forward, her elbows on the table, her head thrown back in laughter at something he had just said. Her hair was dark, almost black in the soft light, and fell in waves over her shoulders. She wore a simple dress that clung in the right places and left her collarbones bare. Her hand rested lightly on his forearm. I watched his face. The way he smiled, slightly sheepish, the dimple in his cheek that appeared when he was genuinely amused. He looked younger than he had in months. He looked awake. My first instinct was to march over, to drop a verbal bomb and watch the blast radius. But something in me froze. Instead, I slipped onto an empty bar stool near a column, half hidden from their view, close enough that I could see them but far enough that they would not notice me unless they were really looking. The bartender asked what I would like. I told him to surprise me. My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone else. He nodded and set to work, the bottles catching the neon as he moved. I watched them talk. It was like watching a movie of my own life, but with a different actress playing my part. Lila reached out once, brushed an imaginary eyelash from his cheek. He did not pull back. He said something that made her tilt her head and study him. They were so obviously in that early tender stage, where every word feels significant, where every glance is another thread tying you closer. When the bartender slid a drink in front of me, I wrapped my fingers around it just to have something to hold on to. The glass was cold, wet with condensation. I took a sip. It was strong and sweet and smoky, with a slice of charred citrus floating on top. It tasted like the room looked. I stayed there longer than I should have, nursing my drink, watching their gestures become more familiar, the distance between their bodies shrink. I was waiting for something, I realized. Waiting for a moment that I could point to later and say there, that is when it became unforgivable. It came when the singer announced the last set. The lights dimmed further, the band shifted into something slower. Couples drifted toward the small dance floor near the stage. Lila stood up, held out her hand. I saw Khan hesitate for a fraction of a second, then he smiled that half smile and let her pull him up. They moved into the crowd, disappearing and reappearing in the shifting bodies. When they came into view again, his hand was on the small of her back the way it used to be on mine. Her head rested against his shoulder. For a moment their faces turned just enough that I could see both profiles. They looked right together. That hurt more than I want to admit. I left before the set ended. I could not stand to see how the night finished. Back in the apartment, I sat on the floor and pressed my back against the couch, still wearing my coat. The room smelled like our laundry detergent and the faint lingering spice of the dinner I had cooked and thrown away earlier. I stared at the blank television screen and waited for the rage to boil over, for the impulse to smash something, to scream. It did not come. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, thin and sharp as ice. An awful little thought crept in at the edges. So this is what it feels like on the other side, it whispered. This is what the women in those stories I always judged feel like. I heard his key in the lock somewhere around 1 a.m. He stepped into the hallway, humming a tune under his breath, and I knew it from the lounge. There was a second where he did not see me, where he was just a man taking off his shoes, hanging up his jacket. Then his eyes met mine across the darkened room. He asked what I was doing up so late. His voice had that careful tone he used with clients and witnesses, as if he were already building a narrative. I told him I could not sleep. I did not ask where he had been. He did not offer. The space between us filled with everything unsaid until it was hard to breathe. I wish I could tell you I confronted him that night, that I laid out the evidence like a lawyer in a courtroom. I did not. I watched him brush his teeth. I watched him fold his clothes. I lay down beside him in the bed we had shared for years, and I stared at the ceiling while his breathing slowed and deepened. The next morning I woke up with a new, twisted resolve in my chest, something reckless and brittle. If he was allowed to go and find a different version of himself in that warm neon light, then maybe I was allowed to do something equally impossible. Maybe I could step outside the life I had been carefully keeping alive with my own hands and see what else there was in the dark. The person who made that possible was someone I had overlooked for almost a year. His name is Murat. He worked in our office as a structural engineer, one of those quiet men who sit in the corner with complex calculations and only speak when something really matters. He had kind eyes and a way of listening that made people feel clever. I knew he had a wife and a little boy because there was a photo taped to his monitor, the three of them on a beach somewhere, barefoot and squinting into the sun. We had always been polite, friendly in that office way. Shared jokes about the terrible coffee, rolled our eyes at last-minute client demands. Now and then we would end up in the smoking balcony at the same time, and he would ask about my designs, pointing at some detail and saying he liked the way a line wrapped around a corner. About a week after the lounge incident, I found myself on that balcony again, the wind cold enough to bring tears to my eyes. I do not smoke, but sometimes I go out there just to feel the air and escape the hum of the open office. Murat was already there, leaning against the railing, a cigarette between his fingers, his gaze lost in the skyline. He said it looked like it might rain, that the clouds were too heavy to hold themselves up much longer. I said I knew the feeling. He laughed softly and asked if everything was all right. It was one of those simple questions that feels dangerous when you are full of things you cannot say. I do not know why I spoke. Maybe because he was not part of the tangle of the waterfront project, because he did not know about the late meetings or the neon lights. I told him that my marriage was not as solid as the structures he calculated. I said it like a joke, but my voice cracked in the middle. He glanced at me, studied my face for a second, and looked back at the city. He said that buildings only looked solid from far away. That up close, everything was a compromise, a series of calculated weaknesses. Then he added that sometimes the weakest parts were the ones you could not see on the plans. I felt something in my throat tighten. I asked, lightly, if he was speaking from experience. He took a drag, exhaled slowly, and said that he and his wife were very good at pretending nothing was wrong, and that sometimes he wondered if that was a more respectable way of failing or a more cowardly one. In that instant, a door opened in my mind. The knowledge that Payne lived in other apartments too, behind other carefully arranged photos and matching mugs. It made me feel less alone and more reckless at the same time. We started meeting on that balcony more often. At first accidentally, then with the predictable rhythm of people who know roughly when the other takes breaks. We talked about work, about the city, about everything and nothing. The air between us crackled with unspoken things. One evening, when most of the office had already left, I found him still at his desk, hunched over a set of drawings. I went over to ask if he had checked a particular load calculation. He nodded, rubbed his eyes, and said he was probably going to sleep in the office at this point. There were faint shadows under his eyes that had nothing to do with the lighting. I asked, impulsively, if he wanted to grab a drink nearby. Just one. Just to reset. He hesitated for a beat too long, then said yes. We ended up in a small bar on a side street, the kind with mismatched chairs and photos of musicians on the walls. It was not glamorous like the lounge by the waterfront. The lighting was kinder, softer. There was faint jazz on the speakers and the clinking of glasses from the back. We sat opposite each other at a small table. I watched his hands as he spoke, the way he wrapped them around his glass, the way he traced the water stains on the wood with his thumb. He told me about his son, about how clever he was with numbers already, how he built impossible towers out of blocks and then cried when they fell. He spoke about his wife in the present tense, but the warmth in his voice had a faded quality, like an old photograph left in the sun. At some point I started talking about the lounge without naming it. I described the lighting, the band, the way people seemed to slip into different versions of themselves there. I did not mention my husband or the woman with the almost black hair. I only said that it was a place where you could pretend, for a few hours, that your life was something you had chosen rather than something that had happened to you. He watched me with an intensity one had not expected from someone so quiet. He said that sounded dangerous. Then he added that I looked different when I talked about it. More alive. I made some self-deprecating comment about how maybe I needed more neon in my life. He smiled, but his eyes were serious. We stayed longer than we meant to. The bar emptied around us. When we finally walked out into the night, the air was damp and smelled like rain again. We stood on the corner where our paths diverged, an awkward pause stretching between us. He said he should go home. I said I should too. We both stayed where we were. There was a moment, a small, stupid moment, when a car passed and sprayed us with a fine mist of water from a puddle. I shrieked, laughing, wiping droplets from my face. He reached out automatically, brushing at my sleeve, his fingers warm through the damp fabric. When I looked up, our faces were closer than they should have been. If this were a movie, this would be the part where the music swells and the camera spins around us. In reality, everything just narrowed down to the feeling of his hand on my arm and the sound of his breath. He whispered that this was a bad idea. I said I knew. Neither of us stepped back. He kissed me like he had been wanting to for a long time and had tried very hard not to. There was hesitation in it, and apology, and hunger. I kissed him back with all the anger and hurt and loneliness I had been carrying since I saw my husband's hand on another woman's back under the red glow of the waterfront lounge. When we pulled apart, the world snapped back into place, louder and uglier. We both started talking at the same time, half-formed protests about spouses and responsibility and ethics. Then we both laughed, breathless and a little terrified. We agreed, without saying it directly, that this was a line we should not cross again. Of course we crossed it again. It did not happen fast, but it also did not take as long as we pretended. A message here, a coffee there, a shared cab ride when it was raining too hard to walk. The first time I went to his small rented flat and saw the evidence of his separation from his wife scattered in boxes and piles, I told myself I was just keeping him company. Just being kind. Just not wanting him to sit alone with the echo of his son's laughter in his head. I am not going to give you explicit details. It is enough to say that we found in each other the warmth and attention we were starved of at home, and that it felt both soothing and corrosive at the same time. He traced the lines of my back like he was reading, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like a person and not a problem to be solved. During the day, I functioned. I went to site meetings. I nodded in presentations. I watched Con from across conference tables and wondered if he could see what I had become in the reflections of the glass. He still went to the waterfront 3 nights a week. Sometimes he stayed out so late that the sky was already light when he came home. I stopped waiting up. In a twisted way, his absence made it easier to justify my own. We were like 2 planets orbiting separate suns, occasionally crossing paths out of momentum rather than gravity. The twist in all of this, the part that still makes my stomach lurch when I think about it, came from a direction I did not anticipate at all. It was a Friday afternoon when the firm announced the internal review. The partners were concerned about leaks, they said. Sensitive project information had been appearing in a rival firm's proposals, and they needed to get to the bottom of it. They would be checking company devices, email logs, even cameras in the office common areas. It was framed as standard procedure, nothing personal. I did not panic at first. I was not stealing plans. My secrets were of a different kind. A week later, I was called into a meeting with HR and one of the partners, a woman named Ice who had always seemed kind to me. They sat me down in a small glass room and told me they had been reviewing camera footage from late nights at the office. There were images of me and Murat on the balcony, in the corridors, in the empty conference room with the lights off. They did not show me the clips. They did not need to. The heat in my face was enough. They said they were not there to make moral judgments about my personal life, but that there were policies about relationships between colleagues, especially those working on sensitive projects. They asked if I had disclosed anything about the waterfront design to him that he did not already have access to. I said no. It was the truth, for once. Then I slid an envelope across the table. She said she was supposed to give this to me. From my husband. I stared at it, uncomprehending, fingers numb. It had my name written on it in his handwriting. Inside, there were 2 things. A folded sheet of paper and a printed photo. The photo was from the waterfront lounge, but not the night I had been there hidden at the bar. It was another night, another angle. In it, I was standing near the entrance with Murat, my hand on his chest, his head bent toward me. The neon sign behind us painted our faces in red and gold. It looked intimate. It was intimate. That much was clear even to a stranger. The note was short. Con wrote that he had known about me and Murat for weeks. That he had recognized something familiar in the way I carried myself, in the way I smiled at my phone. He had hired a private security consultant through the hotel to look into possible leaks from the firm, and somewhere along the way the investigation had shifted focus. They had watched me without my knowledge, collected images, timestamps, patterns. He wrote that he had not confronted me immediately because he wanted to see whether I would come to him on my own. Whether there was enough of us left for a confession. He had waited. I had not come. He added, in a painful postscript, that the night I had sat at the bar and watched him with Lila, he had known I was there. The security team had notified him. He had let the scene play out anyway, curious about how far I would let my own narrative of martyrdom go. That was the twist. The realization that while I thought I was the one watching him betray me from the shadows, he had been watching me too, cataloging my own betrayals with clinical precision. We were both main characters in our own private tragedies, both casting ourselves as the wronged party, both editing the scenes to fit the story we preferred. The firm gave me a choice. Resign quietly, or face a formal review that would almost certainly end in dismissal and gossip that could crater my career. It was not really a choice. I signed the resignation papers with a hand that did not feel like mine. Murat was gone the next day. His desk empty, the photo of his wife and son removed, the chair pushed in neatly. HR told me he had decided to seek opportunities elsewhere. I did not know whether he had been given the same envelope, the same quiet threat. I did not know whether he had gone home and told the truth or built another lie on top of the ones we had already woven together. At home, the final collapse was quieter than you would expect. No shouting, no thrown objects. Just the two of us at the dining table with a stack of papers and a silence that felt heavier than any fight we had ever had. He said he had not planned to use the firm's investigation in this way, but that once he saw the footage, he could not unsee it. He said he had considered revenge, affairs on top of affairs, a scorched earth approach. In the end, he said, he realized he was tired. Tired of performance, tired of neon disguises, tired of building a marriage on shared projects and avoiding the fault lines in ourselves. I asked about Lila. He said it was over. That he had ended it the night he saw me in the bar, sitting alone with my drink. Something about the way I looked had jolted him. He did not tell her why. He simply withdrew. She moved on, he said. People always do, eventually. We signed separation papers a month later. Friends were shocked. On the surface, we had still looked like a golden couple, two architects with good taste and matching coats. My mother asked if there was someone else. I told her no. It was a lie that came easily by then. Now I live in a smaller apartment with thin walls and too much light in the mornings. The firm is a number I deleted from my phone. I freelance, taking small design jobs, cafes, and tiny apartments, spaces where people want warmth more than prestige. Sometimes I walk by the waterfront at night and see the glow of the lounge from a distance. I never go inside. I do not speak to Khan. I do not speak to Murat. I could tell you that I am punishing them, but the truth is I am still not sure what to do with myself, let alone with them. Some mornings I wake up and think I invented all of it. The balcony, the bar, the neon, the envelopes. Other mornings I feel the weight of every decision in my bones. If there is a moral here, I have not found it yet. I only know this: betrayal is almost never as simple as one person crossing a line and the other standing innocent on the far side. It is more like erosion, a slow wearing away of trust and tenderness until one day the smallest wave can pull everything out to sea. When I look back now, the part that haunts me is not the kiss on the rainy street corner or the way Murat's hands felt on my skin. It is the years before, when I convinced myself I was fine, that we were fine, that wanting more was selfish. It is the nights I lay next to my husband and did not tell him that I was lonely. It is the mornings I watched him leave without asking where he was really going in his head. I betrayed myself long before I betrayed him. He did the same. The rest was just the inevitable collapse of a structure we both knew, deep down, was compromised. You asked me once why I stayed so long and then left so quickly. This is the closest I can get to an answer. I stayed because I believed that endurance was the same as love. I left because, eventually, the lies we told ourselves became louder than the vows we made to each other. If I ever build something with someone again, I want it to be less impressive from the outside and more honest in the foundations. No neon illusions, no hidden cameras, no balcony confessions. Just two people, sitting at a table somewhere under decent lighting, telling the truth before the rain starts and the lights blur and the whole city starts to melt.